Hello, everyone. My name is Ken Anderson, and I'm the Dean of the Gonzaga University School of Business Administration. And I'm so pleased to welcome you tonight to the first annual presentation of the Canfield Lifelong Learning Series, tonight featuring Chris Lowney. A quick note on format. After my opening remarks, our president, Thane McCullough, will offer his comments and introduce our guest. Chris will then give his talk to be followed by a question and answer session. I expect us to conclude the evening by 7:30 p.m. Our School of Business is thrilled to bring you this talk, and let me tell you how proud I am of our business school community, and that includes students, staff, faculty, alumni, and partners. Proud of how we have rallied over the past few months. No different than the situations all of you find yourself in. It has not been easy, and we have not always been perfect, but the commitment of our business school community to be a global leader in Jesuit business education has not wavered. We continue to strive for academic excellence. In a moment, Thane will highlight some of our recent accomplishments. Let me add just one more. We just learned that a team of our accounting students was named one of 9 regional winners in the Deloitte case study competition in tax. They will be moving on to the national competition in mid-January, and we all know that deserves a very, very hearty go Zags. We continue to be engaged with our partners and our communities outside the Jepson Center. We have almost a dozen active advisory boards. We are continually hosting virtual events to bring us together, and we have projects going on currently with multiple community partners. And we continue to be inspired by our Jesuit legacy and mission. Events like tonight's Canfield Family Lifelong Learning Series, as well as last week's Aram Lecture on Business Ethics, reflect that inspiration, as does our commitment to hands-on learning. Make no mistake, this business school is doing great things. And as we prepare for our centennial celebration, we embrace the rich tradition that is our past, and we look confidently to the bold future that's in front of us. Why are we so confident? It's because of the same answer you get anywhere you go on Gonzaga's campus. We have great people. So thank you to our community members, including every single one of you who have joined us here tonight. I understand there may be upwards of 300 of you. What a fantastic turnout for this first edition of the Canfield Family Lifelong Learning Series. A couple of specific thank yous are also in order at this point in time. I want to say thank you to Whitney Franklin, Jeff Geldine, and Dory Sontag of University Advancement for their support and partnership, not only for this event, but for everything that we do. I want to say thank you to Maureen Duclos and AJ Hawk of the School of Business Administration, who handle all the details and logistics that make great events like this happen. A heartfelt thank you to my friend Bob McCambridge, who over breakfast in Seattle suggested Chris as a speaker. And finally, a big thank you to the Canfield family, Brad, Leslie, Jessica, and Max, for their vision, commitment, and sponsorship of this series. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the president of Gonzaga, Thane McCullough. He has shown remarkable vision and resilience over the past few months, and his leadership has been central to where we are today. Thank you. Enjoy the evening. I'll be back with you soon, and please welcome President Thane McCullough.
The complexities of today's world call for more ethical business leaders, more innovation, and more entrepreneurial spirit. In Catholic Jesuit terms, we put this to work for the greater glory of God, and we call it magis. At Gonzaga, this is our daily calling. I am honored to be here with my colleagues in the School of Business Administration, which has consistently delivered on our mission to educate people for lives of leadership and service for the common good. Many of whom have gone on to contribute to industry and society as a whole through various business professions, specifically at top employers: Deloitte, Boeing, Moss Adams, DocuSign, Vanguard, and many others, spanning industries from healthcare to hospitality, tech, and beyond. Next year, the university will celebrate a tremendous moment for the School of Business Administration: 100 years of business education at Gonzaga. This special milestone has been empowered by the hard work and support of our students, faculty and staff, alumni, industry partners, and benefactors. So, to each and every one of you tuning in, thank you. You have elevated Gonzaga's School of Business Administration onto a path toward becoming a global leader in Jesuit business education, and we look forward to celebrating all that we have accomplished together next year. The evidence accounting for your impact is clear. We are ranked in the top 23% of undergraduate business programs in the nation. We are in the top 25 for undergraduate finance programs and for graduate accounting. And our undergraduate accounting program comes in at 27th in the country. We have a top 100 ranked MBA program and are 55th in the nation for our part-time MBA. We are one of less than 200 schools who have earned dual accreditation in business and accounting by the AACSB. Our students' performance further demonstrates our collective commitment to excellence. They have put Gonzaga in the top 3% nationwide for first-time CPA pass rates, and nearly half of them are taking on more than one thing at a time, double majoring, carrying a minor or a double concentration. And true to our Jesuit roots, many of our students are at the same time giving back to the community through donations of their time, resources, and talents as well. Like you, they do more to show up for each other, the community, and the world. Gonzaga's School of Business Administration is actively engaged in our community, working together with partners across disciplines and throughout industries to animate what's being learned in the classroom and make a difference for others. Our faculty, staff, students, and alumni embrace the Jesuit principles of inspired, confident, and innovative action, and it pays off. We have graduates working in 30 states and 6 countries, and 144 students participating in internships at 134 different organizations last year alone. Gonzaga University's School of Business Administration is proud of our near 100-year history and the impact thus far, but this is only the beginning. We are keenly focused on leading the way into the future and how we can partner together to do more and be more for all. It is our hope that you will join us in this endeavor as we move toward what the next 100 years will look like. Tonight's special guest is no stranger to the Gonzaga community. He was the 2009 Gonzaga University commencement speaker, and his work is studied in many Gonzaga classes across disciplines. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce the Vice Chair of the Board of Common Spirit Health, America's largest nonprofit health system. He is a one-time Jesuit seminarian who later served as a managing director of J.P. Morgan & Company on 3 continents. His bestseller, Heroic Leadership, aligns Jesuit values with his 4 pillars of great leadership. Leaders are self-aware, heroic, ingenious, and loving. He has lectured in more than 24 countries on leadership, business ethics, decision-making, and more. And tonight, we are so grateful to have him here once again with us to talk about how 2020 is preparing us to lead in 2021 and beyond. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chris Lowney.
Thank you, Thane, for that kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to give this lecture, and the only sad thing is that we can't all be in the same room together, but maybe that moment will come sometime in the future before too long. First, let me thank Ken and his team for the kind invitation to be here, and above all, I want to thank the Canfield family for making this opportunity available to us. That's wonderful. And a couple of housekeeping things before I start. One, I think the chat box is going to be open pretty much all during the talk, and it's absolutely fine with me if folks want to have an ongoing conversation. If there are ideas that you like and you want to comment on them, that's wonderful. Ideas you don't like, you want to comment on, that's fine too. You'll see in a moment, Dee will put up the title slide, and my contact information is there. If you want to email me and be in contact, I'm more than happy for that. And the last thing I'll say before we get going is, in a way, I gave the wrong title. I say the new leader, what 2020 taught us. But in a way, I'm going to be talking about what 2020 taught me. Some of my personal experiences, what I've gotten out of that, what it's made me think about leadership, not a treatise on everything about leadership, but a few thoughts that have crossed my mind, and I hope some are valuable to you as we go through it. And I'll say this, that as I'm going through, I'm also going to be sharing how I think the Jesuit tradition that is yours, your Gonzaga Jesuit tradition, part of the spirituality of this place, if you will, is a huge competitive advantage for leading well that you have by nature, by virtue of being part of the Zags community. So with that, how about we start? And I want to put things in a bigger context first. And let me invite you to think about the world today and the world 10, 15 years ago. And if you want to use your chat box, that's fine. You don't have to. If you think the world today is more volatile, faster paced, you could just type a more in the chat box if you wish. If you think that the world is more complex than it was 10 or 15 years ago, give us a more. If you think that in the course of managing your life or managing an organization, you'd have to cope with more change, make more decisions, give us a more. And I can tell you what the answer is. I don't have to wait to read the chat box. 80, 90% of people are going to say, absolutely, the world is more volatile, it's faster paced, more complex, I have to make more decisions. And people would respond this way even before the pandemic, even before what we went through in 2020. So what I want to suggest is that what we've gone through this year, in a way, is part of a broader dynamic, if you will. In other words, we're in an era of so much change, so much complexity, so much volatility. The military has thought about this phenomenon a lot with respect to the world that they have of military operations, and they've given us a beautiful, handy little acronym to capture the way the world is today. They tell us that we're living in a world that's VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And when you get into these sort of environments, leadership, first of all, becomes really difficult because when everything is very straightforward, where I can see where I want to be in 2 years with certainty, okay, not a tough job. But when I don't really know what the world is going to be like in 6 months, much less 3 years, it's really tough to make the kind of calls that every leader, whether it's a family, an organization, a Fortune 500 company, has to make. And in his own language, Pope Francis has given us a kind of a meditation on the sort of way the world feels now. I'm not going to dwell, I'm not going to read every sentence in detail. I'll sort of skim through. So he talks about, we're living through a change of epoch where things are no longer in their place. Our ways of explaining the world and relationships no longer seem to work. Things we'd never thought would happen are happening. And that which appeared normal to us probably won't seem that way. So in a way, he's describing a sort of a profound disequilibrium. I thought I understood the world. I thought I knew what the world was like, but now I'm in this era where I feel a little bit at sea. And, the punchline of that quote, which I'll just read to you, we cannot simply wait for what we're experiencing to pass under the illusion that things will return to being how they were before. And, whatever our discomfort in whatever arena we have to lead, we have to heed this part of the Pope's message. In other words, leadership means you can't just wait for the world to go back to normal, calm down, for things to be the way they were. We have to step up and lead, and that's really hard. A phrase I like that I've sometimes heard is, part of the challenge of leading in this world of VUCA we now all have is that we all have to get comfortable with the reality of being uncomfortable. In other words, yes, it's uncertain, it's a bit scary, I'm not totally sure about some of the calls I have to make, but I'm just going to accept that and get comfortable with this reality that we now all have to cope with. I saw a survey that Deloitte did of their clients. I think it was over about 1,000 clients. And they asked them about leadership and leadership in their organizations. And look at the punchline of what came back to them. 80% of respondents rated leadership a high priority for their organizations, but only 41% told us they think their organizations are ready. I don't know if that surprises you or not, but I see it as a kind of a reflection of this VUCA environment. I won't read the rest of the sentences, but let me mention this by the way. If there are any of the quotes or any ideas that you like and you want to have the PowerPoint, you're more than welcome to it. You're going to get an email afterward from Whitney at Gonzaga, and she'll give you an invitation to ask for the PowerPoint. So, with that big picture backdrop, world of VUCA, uncertain, difficult environment, the theme I want to develop, the agenda, if you will, for the rest of the talk, is that we're in a moment where we need a kind of a new culture of leadership. A new culture of leadership. And these are the dot points I'm going to go through to develop some of what that culture looks like. First two ideas: culture where everyone embraces their leadership opportunity, and that we all need to improve our leadership skills. And then we need to be more adaptive, have a habit of reflection, commit to purpose greater than self. I'm going to develop all those ideas, but for the moment, just let me talk about the first two, a culture where everyone leads. As I talk about leadership, it's most people's natural instinct to think, oh yeah, what he's saying is probably really relevant for the president of that company or the president of the United States or this bishop. And I'm not talking about hierarchical, famous celebrity leaders. I'm talking about all of us, and that we all somehow embrace the leadership opportunities we all have. And I know that's not the way we tend to think. In other words, we don't think about ourselves as leaders. But let me try to justify it in two ways. The first way is this: we all agreed that the world is more complex, faster changing, more volatile. And in any organization on earth, be it a family, a company, if you have multiplying, more complex, more difficult challenges, you also need more talent in the game. You need more people helping to meet and solve those challenges. So we need to invite and call people to step up and lead. And here's another way I justify this point. If you look in a dictionary, among the many definitions you'd find of the word leadership will be this one: to point out a way, direction, or goal and to influence others toward it. And isn't it true that all of us are doing those words all the time? We're pointing out a way. We're not holding a sign, and saying this is the way to go. But implicitly, by virtue of how we use our time, how we treat other people, what our priorities are, we're implicitly pointing the way, saying this is the way I think humans ought to live and work. And we're having influence. Some of us are managing hundreds of people. We're having big influence on lots of people. Others of us are in a family. We're having influence on one or two or three people around us. Others are mostly individual contributors in an organization, but we're always interacting and having influence. So that's my first core idea, that I want you to think everything I'm saying is not about some poobah at the top of some organization. It's about us. And we all have the Moses problem, which means we all have to get better at our leadership skills. And let me explain what I mean by that. Everybody remembers that classic biblical story of Moses, right? The Israelites are in slavery in Egypt. Moses leads them out of slavery. They get to the shore of the Red Sea. The Egyptian army is coming. They're pinned. And he parts the Red Sea, and through it they go. Now, how is that for leadership? I mean, surely anybody who pulls that off has the allegiance of his followers for the rest of his career, huh? Read on. And, within another chapter of the Bible, it's like, hey, Moses, the Red Sea trick was 72 hours ago. Now I'm in the middle of the desert. I'm hot, I'm bored, I'm unhappy, and I want to know when we're going to get where we're going. And here's the problem. Moses doesn't know either. He has this idea, of course, that we're going to a promised land. But what people want is a very natural thing that anybody legitimately wants of a leader. Don't tell me just we're going to the promised land. Tell me we're going to take I-5 and we're going to take exit 28 and we're going to be there in 8 hours. In other words, people naturally want some very clear sense of direction from leaders. And given what we teed up in the first few slides, we can't give people this clear sense of direction in such a volatile world. And therefore, we have to compensate by some of our other leadership skills and abilities. That's the idea. So we all have the Moses problem. We can't say clearly where we're all going to be in a year or two or three, so we have to find other ways to keep people engaged, motivated, and loyal and with us. And I'm going to try to develop some themes, some ways that we might think about for our own leadership project by telling a few stories. And you'll see on the slide, I'm basically going to go through 4 stories. In the upper left here is going to be the story of the hospital that died and came back to life. Bottom left, we're going to talk about recharging our phones. Then we're going to talk about the peanut butter sandwich. And then we're going to talk about a pit stop. And if anybody is confused at how this is all going to add up to leadership, let's hope I manage to land the plane. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the hospital that died and came to life. And that's going to be a story that goes to the dot point I said about, my third dot point was we all need to become a little more ingenious, a little more adaptive leaders, free internally. And as a quip to illustrate what I'm talking about, I use this quote from the famous mathematician James York, who helped develop chaos theory. And one of his lines, the most successful people I know are good at plan B. And in a VUCA world, it's always plan B. Plan A doesn't work. The money isn't available, things change, obstacles come up, folks, I can't get them to go along. So we all need this sort of inner resilience, this ability to adapt, this ability to be ingenious and try new attempts. And this story of this hospital helps me to illustrate part of what I'm talking about here. You heard from Thane that I'm on the board of a large hospital system. This hospital pictured is not one of our hospitals. It was from another system. And in fact, it was closed down at the end of this past year. and COVID came. And the government in the state of California and in the Los Angeles area needed desperately to try to get more capacity to handle surges of patients. And so they came to our hospital system, they came to Kaiser, they came to the state, and they tried to see, is there any possibility of creating a partnership to reopen this hospital as a surge hospital, just west of downtown Los Angeles. And the doctor, you saw her briefly on the patio of that hospital. She got the first call in the middle of March, and within about 3 weeks, all contracts were settled. 4 different organizations, the state, the city. They went ahead and hired about 400 different people, figured out new protocols, rewired the whole place. And they, in their short life as a surge hospital, a couple of months, dealt with dozens and dozens and dozens of severely ill COVID patients. And I have to tell you, as a board member of a large hospital system, that kind of story was absolutely emblematic of the adaptability, the resilience that we saw all over the system. I mean, things like the kind of transaction I just described, where you have 2 large hospital systems leasing a property from a third, state involved, those are the kind of things that take months, if not years. It got done in weeks. And so too, in hospital after hospital, you have people who were trained as neurosurgeons, as orthopedic surgeons, as ER, as operating room nurses and technicians, all kinds of people saying, okay, I was trained to do X, but right now I'm becoming a COVID emergency response person. We had all kinds of supply shortages, and within short periods of time, people figuring out how to use 3D printing to create masks, people figuring out how to use telehealth facilities, people figuring out how to transfer best practices and supplies nationwide across the system. This absolutely amazing blossoming of ingenuity and creativity. And I know that we can invite up to this podium pretty much everybody who's listening right now, and you would have your own parallel stories of exactly the same kind of thing. Whether you're in education, whether you're in technology, whether you're in manufacturing, retail, there's been this amazing blossoming of people's ability to adapt. And I suspect some of you would kind of yawn and say, well, yeah, of course. I mean, of course we all adapted because we had no other choice. We had to. And in a way, this gets exactly to the point I want to try to make, and one of the new culture of leadership skills I want to encourage us to reflect on in our own lives. Yes, we adapted now because we felt we had no other choice. But we have that gene within us, that ability to create, to try something new, to try a new way of doing things, to take a little bit of risk. And how is it that when we get back into normal life, that gene quickly gets recessed, and it's really hard for us to become free enough to adapt, to be ingenious. And I think, in a way, the Jesuit tradition of your place is giving us a little bit of a clue, a hint, something to reflect on. And the answer is on this slide right here. We're all going to become more adaptive people if we all learn how to unload our inner baggage. Now, I'm grossly oversimplifying an idea from St. Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits. He didn't talk about unloading inner baggage, but that's my Queens Street, New York, 21st century version of a very profound idea he shares. He, in his spiritual exercises, I'm sure many of you would be familiar with the idea of them. He develops this idea that, first of all, we all have to have a kind of a clear sense of mission in life. And then he develops the idea that often what holds us back from being able to follow our mission fully enough is what he calls disordinate attachments, what I say inner baggage. So in other words, I want to be a good person, but I'm so enslaved by my own greed or lust or whatever it may be, that it prevents me from following the mission as I understand it as well as I can. So that's the way he kind of lays it out. And I have always found this an incredibly durable, relevant idea, certainly in the moral, religious context that he raises it, but far, far beyond that. Think, for example, of the experience that we have in organizations where we all know part of our job as managers is to be open to new ideas, to empower other people, and so on. But what happens? We sit around a table, new ideas come up, and immediately it starts to activate my own inner baggage, my demons, my attachments. In other words, no, I need to be in control. I need to make the decision. I don't like that idea because I'm not the one who came up with it. My ego is all involved here. So in this spiritual technology that Ignatius is giving us, he might say, part of the reason, perhaps, why you're not sufficiently free to try new things, to adapt, is because of your inner baggage. And in this kinds of cases, it might be the kinds of things that often cripple us in organizational life or in business life, our fears of failure, our fears of trying something new because we're not 100% sure it's correct, our fears that if I make the wrong call, I'm going to look bad in front of my team. So our fears sometimes are part of the inner baggage that's going to hold us back from keeping this gene of adaptability alive in our lives. I want to go now a little bit further and kind of move on to maybe a deeper source of why we're sometimes too burdened with inner baggage. And I want to kind of get to the idea of being appropriately humble and understanding that we're kind of not in control of this world that we find ourselves in. And in order to develop that idea, I'm going to shift from the world of hospitals and talk about a couple of very different stories. I am fortunate enough each Tuesday evening to join a group of folks who does a food distribution for folks who live on the streets of New York City or others who want to come. And traditionally, we've done it in the lobby of one of these corporate office buildings and a sort of lobby atrium right across the street from Grand Central. I bet some of you have passed by it, haven't even noticed. And it's one of those atriums that if you go at lunchtime, it's corporate people eating their lunch, taking a break. If you go in the evening, you'll see folks who live on the street sometimes going there to warm up. And of course, when COVID came, those atriums, like everything else in New York City, absolutely shut down. And for folks who live on the streets, it really was a huge disruption in their life ecosystem. A lot of food pantries shut down, some of the shelters they use, and so on. And so those of us in this little group said, okay, we want to keep our Tuesday evening ritual alive with so much else disappearing. And since we no longer have a site to use, we just drove around the city, and that's how we do our distribution. And I took a couple of photos I'll show you now. I'll tell you, to drive around New York City streets in March and April, you saw the city like you've never seen it before. Here's Grand Central Terminal at rush hour one evening in late March. Here, in case you don't know it, on the upper left is what Grand Central used to look like at rush hour. And here is the streets right around Rockefeller Center. I'm sure a lot of you have been there. On the left, or at least on my left of the screen, is that area right around the skating rink. You see the flags there. And on the right, down at the end of the street, maybe you can see the Radio City Music Hall lights on the right. So the city really became a ghost town. And for a lot of the folks in the street community, it really changed their life dramatically. And here is, if you'll see this tall kiosk there is a charging station that's right on the street. And so one evening, one evening I'm driving around and I come around a corner and there's this guy, Bob, who's standing there charging his phone at not this particular kiosk. I just use this one, for example. And, we chat for a while, and, Bob's life has been turned upside down. He used to charge his phone inside a public library where it would be open and also check his email there. And by the way, even most of the places where he could go to take care of to urinate, frankly, McDonald's and so on, all closed down. Some of the places he went for his food also changed. So this guy, in a matter of a couple of weeks, had to completely renovate his life and his resources and his ecosystem. And the observation that I had for myself and that I want to share with you is he was getting on with life. He was getting on with life. And I have worked with corporate leaders who were extremely well respected as crisis managers who were not halfway as resilient as this guy Bob was. And I came home that evening and I chatted with a buddy of mine, and I noticed this experience that I met this guy who seems to have managed, despite all this hardship, to have been so resilient in dealing with it, as opposed to the rest of us who kind of had our hair on fire and we're finding it terribly difficult. And my friend made this observation. He said, that doesn't surprise me at all. The way I look at it, he says, is, this guy always understood that the world didn't revolve around him and he didn't control the world. And there's a lot in the world that's beyond his control. For the rest of us, we're learning some of that stuff for the first time. I mean, we're not literally intellectually learning it. Of course, we know the world does not revolve around us and we don't control everything in it. But his point was, we tend to live and behave as if it is in our control. And when it isn't, things kind of go haywire internally. There's kind of feelings of sometimes bitterness and a loss of entitlement and so on. And it made me wonder if one of the fruits that gives us resilience, that gives us courage to cope in a VUCA world, has to do with coming to grips in some deep way with the fact that, something, it's not my world, I don't control it. And that brings with it a kind of humility that helps us always in all kinds of leadership situations. Because, the humility is what enables us to say, something, I might not always have the best idea. I might not be right. I need to listen to others in the family, on the team, in the organization. This kind of radical understanding that we're not in control maybe also helps us to be the kind of people who say, things do go wrong in life. I have to be the kind of person who's good at plan B if I'm going to do well. I want to talk about something else I learned on the streets, which I think gives us another lesson we might take away for our own leadership practice in the world today. And I'm going to talk to you about this peanut butter sandwich. So on a different Tuesday evening, I'm driving around, and I come around the corner, and I see this guy that I didn't know. Many of the folks on the route, you kind of get to know them, and you become friends with them. So this guy I didn't really know, but I pulled over, and I say hi. Let's call him Dev. And I asked him if he wanted a peanut butter sandwich, and he did. And man, this guy was so incredibly grateful to me. He put his hand on his heart, and I felt he almost had tears in his eyes. Incredibly grateful. And it was near the end of the run, and I had a little bit extra, so I said, hey, you want another? And he recoiled physically, and he said, no, I can't take another. He said, there are people further up 51st Street under the scaffolding, and maybe they need something. And, in the days after that, I was kind of haunted by the sense of gratitude that this guy had for that sandwich. And you know, what went through my mind was, just because I happen to know where my next sandwich is coming from, and when the pandemic came, that I kind of cleaned out the local supermarkets like you all did, and my pantries were well stuffed. Just because I have stuff, why should it make me any less grateful for what comes my way every day than this guy was for that sandwich? And he's been a kind of a rebuke to me, frankly, a lesson and a rebuke. And, you know, it's the business school that has brought us here. And those of you who are in business organizational life could be forgiven for thinking, okay, look, Chris, that's a nice idea. I agree we should be grateful. But how does it have anything to do with my life as a leader in a business or in an organization? And I'll give you the answer to that question, actually. Anybody who's studied any of the research that we're getting on psychology of happiness and gratitude, so on, is well aware of this conclusion that I'm showing you. Adults who keep gratitude journals exercise more regularly, report fewer illness symptoms, feel better about their lives as a whole, and are more optimistic about the future. And you all know as well as I do that if you get a team of people with those kind of characteristics in common, that team is going to perform very productively. And so, in a way, I'm sharing this story about gratitude partially to invite us to think about our own personal lives, but also, if we want to think about our lives in leaders and organizations, the power of gratitude is also really important. And in fact, I think it's so important that I might invite you to do this on the next, on this slide. By now, I'm sure you're all getting a little bored of listening to me, so here's something you could do instead. Start a gratitude storm. Send an email, text right now, to a colleague, family member. Express gratitude for something about them or something they accomplished or for their support. And I promise you that if we could make our teams, families, organizations, businesses, places that were characterized by more gratitude, there would also be more happiness and more productivity and so on. I'm kind of drawing near the end of my time, but I still have a couple more ideas I want to share. Let me say this, that a lot of times when people talk about leadership, it's all about tips, tactics, this kind of stuff. And I haven't spoken about any of that stuff. Most of what have been speaking about is really a thought exercise. How do I think about my life as a leader in all its aspects? And what kind of behaviors does that entail from me? And the Jesuit tradition that we're all part of, that every ZAG is part of, gives you a real handy little tool for helping you to remain mindful of some of these thought ideas that I've shared so far. Once again, I'm going to use a little New York slang instead of Ignatius's language. The way I might put it is the founder of the Jesuits, Ignatius, kind of invites us once or twice every day to take a little mental pit stop. Every race car driver knows that he needs to stop or she needs to stop and cannot complete the whole race. And similarly, we might think, in the course of the days we're living, when can I take 3, 4, 5 minutes right after lunch? Or maybe when I'm driving home, for those of us who still drive to work? Or maybe before I go to bed? Just take a few minutes, and during those few minutes, just do 3 very simple tasks. 1, remind yourself why you're grateful as a person. It'll help us to acquire the virtue I just spoke about for the last few minutes. So for a few moments, just remind yourself, why am I grateful as a person? We tend to spend our whole life thinking about to-do list, problems, what comes next, and just for a few seconds, it's okay to think, why am I grateful? And then second, expand your horizon or lift your horizon. What I mean is this: we tend to live our days with our horizon like this. Like, this is the email I need to return now. This is the phone call I have to answer. This is what I want to have for lunch. Instead of that, for a few seconds, lift your horizon up and think something like, why am I here on earth anyway? Or why am I doing this job with my life? Or what was that takeaway I had from my schooling or my work at Gonzaga? And then third, all in these same few minutes, just review the day so far. Go through the meetings you've been in so far, the people you interacted with, the problems you had to deal with. And, take away some little lesson that might help you in the next few hours. So, for example, I was irritated all morning. I lashed out at somebody. And so now let me process that, get over it, and get back to life more productively, maybe even make amends. If I'm a religious person, maybe even pray for enlightenment. And I think the genius of this really simple practice becomes so obvious when we think about the worlds we're all trying to live in now amidst VUCA. We're kind of floating along all day on this river of email, meeting, phone call, text, distraction. And we get to the end of the workday, and we've been 100% present. 100% present to every random, idiotic, miscellaneous distraction that crossed our radar. The only thing we haven't been present to is what ultimately is most important. What's going on inside me in some deep way? What's my relationship with my Creator or a higher power, as I understand that? And I trust you're able to infer, the light bulb goes off about how just doing this little simple practice every day is automatically going to help me to review and acquire some of these leadership virtues that I've been talking about. The virtue of gratitude, the virtue about radical humility, understanding it's not my world, the virtue of thinking about myself as having a leadership opportunity. I want to just take my final 2 minutes to share one last kind of idea that I take away from the stories I told you. Whether it's the example of those folks in the many hospitals that are part of the Common Spirit hospital system who have shown such incredible self-sacrifice in serving those in need, or whether we focus on a micro level at this guy, Dev. Remember, I told you that when I offered him a second sandwich, he said, no. Maybe someone further on needs one. So the last idea I want to talk about is this idea of generosity of spirit, of kind of appreciating that ultimately, it's not about me. Everybody who has ever run a team, an organization, a company, has understood that the teams that work best are teams where people get over themselves and appreciate, this is not about me. It's not only about my ego, my career, my status, my income. Rather, teams do well when folks are able to invest some of their ego, some of their talent, some of their time in some worthy purpose that's bigger than them. And in a world of VUCA, a world afflicted by COVID, a world afflicted by some of the economic and racial inequities that we've all seen in these months, man, do we need people who have this kind of sense of leadership at the forefront. And so that's the last idea I want to leave with you. And this idea of thinking of myself as a leader who is here for others, for purposes greater than self. In Jesuit lingo, we might say, for the magis. I gave the example of Dev, who doesn't accept the second peanut butter sandwich, who says, go to the folks in the next block, maybe they need some. And it's a very touching example, but it's not a very durable day-to-day leadership example. In other words, I'm not really inviting you to bring peanut butter sandwiches for everybody on your team every day, although maybe that would be interesting to do once or twice. So let me help you to conceive more practical, durable, day-to-day ways of understanding how I might be a leader who puts others first, yet still is mindful of accomplishing our bottom line mission as an organization. And I'm going to skip a couple here, and I'll just share one or two quotes. Here's one from Mike Tomlin, coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a few of you may be aware there is also football teams on the East Coast, okay? I'm sorry. Once he was interviewed about his job as a coach, and look what he says. Every day, when I go to work, I think about the things I could do to make my team successful. So I have a servant's mentality in terms of how I approach my job. In other words, my job, I'm not here for the people on the team to serve me. I'm serving them. And how do I serve them? By making them successful. And sometimes that means being encouraging, supportive, nice. Sometimes that means being very tough and frank and honest and difficult. But if you get a team where everybody is thinking this way, you're really going to do well. Here's one more quote, framed very differently, but very same bottom line. This is Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook, and look what she says. Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. What a wonderful promise this is. Whether it's Gonzaga University or any company on earth, if we get a team of folks who lived and worked with this kind of impact, that team would really, really do well. I've gone just a handful of minutes over what I promised Ken I would do, so I apologize to Ken and Whitney and the team. But I will kind of end there. I'll look forward to any kind of discussion or questions. And I think I have an email, I have a slide there with my own email address, and for sure I'm happy to be in touch after, and I'll look forward to the discussion now and afterwards. So thank you very much for listening. And now Ken will join.
Thank you, Chris.
My pleasure.
Wonderful talk. As many of you know, we asked for questions before the talk and also gave the audience the opportunity to submit questions during the talk. So while we're bringing those up, I'll start with one, Chris, and building off the football team from the East Coast, who can only afford the logo on one side of their helmet, and Facebook, and this notion of, say, a modus style of leadership. How do you develop that in an individual? As you know, in heroic leadership, and implicitly in what I say here, for me personally, I guess I think that self-awareness is really foundational for good leaders. And to me, I worked at JP Morgan for a number of years, and it's a wonderful place. I was very happy to work there. But these places are filled with a lot of ambition, fear, pressure, greed, and I think those are not good for the human animal, especially for the human animal who's now managing a team and needs to deliver results. And I just speak for myself, I found like it was always very hard to be the kind of person that I just quoted, the Mike Tomlin manager, the Sheryl Sandberg manager, the kind of Jesuit tradition, I'm here to serve the team and put others ahead of myself. And so the only thing I can say, philosophically, usually it's not the problem. Like a lot of people, I suspect 95% of the folks who are watching us would say, yeah, of course, that's who I want to be. I want to be somebody that when I come to work, I'm making those around me, I'm making them better. And that's, for me, the joy of being a manager. And so for me, the problem is not the philosophical agreement. To me, the problem is the day-to-day, how do I remain true to this
in the midst of this crazy pressure, stress, careerism, everything else that's swirling around me. And, you know, I would never present myself as the role model of doing that. You know, I mean, I tried. I hope I did okay. I mean, I recommended the mental pit stop, and I do feel like without some kind of mechanism that takes you out of the chaos every day, it's hard to remain true to what you may believe is the right way to manage.
So here's one that came in before your talk. In your book, Heroic Leadership, you discuss the power of love, its ability to transform relationships, provide new ways to navigate power and leadership. Historically and culturally, many consider love a feminine or soft skill, a practice relegated to religious contexts and family relationships. Have you experienced difficulty or backlash talking about this idea in professional spaces among groups or individuals who have difficulty accepting love as a practice with authority and relevance?
Good. Real life question, real world question. You know, I mean, look, I didn't walk around J.P. Morgan hugging people and telling them I love them. I don't think I ever used that word in a setting for this kind of reason that the person points out, and maybe that's my own weakness. I would say this, that now in the years since, when I have used that word, I've never had a bad reaction. That's the first thing I would say. What people sometimes say is this, which I get. People sometimes say, okay, yeah, I mean, I resonate with that personally, but I feel afraid, or I feel like I cannot unilaterally disarm, so to speak. You know, like in other words, if I kind of show first, I'm going to get eaten alive. And I'm not so sure that's true, but I do get that, frankly, from my own work in life. And therefore, I think it's valuable and maybe important for people who have the position of manager or authority to be willing to be the one who's vulnerable enough to say that, you know? Now, when I use the word now, word love now these days, I always try to unpack it, explain it, and so on. And, you know, Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval philosopher Thomas Aquinas, he has this definition of love, which is the way I talk about it. He says, to love is to will the good of another. In other words, to wish what's good for another. And when you think about it, I mean, gosh, that's what every organization wants and what we want from every manager. You know, like in other words, if I'm managing you, I want you to flourish, to perform at your utmost potential, to be as productive as possible, to progress in your own career. If I say it those ways, everybody say, oh yeah, that's what I want. When we use the word love, then we kind of freak out for reasons that I understand. I would say one other thing, a quote that I often use, you must love those you lead before you could be an effective leader. And that quote is from General Eric Shinseki. A few folks will recognize him, at one time Chief of Staff, highest ranking military officer in the United States. And I have sometimes found this as well when I've given talks, that the folks who have the least trouble with the word are the folks who are in the very toughest, literally toughest professions, you know, where they feel, yes, I depend on this other person for my life, and I have to love them, and they have to love me. And I guess I'm just trying to open up a space where maybe we say to each other, you know, how do we need to think about each other and treat each other in order to create workplaces where people can perform their best and not feel eaten alive, you know?
So one that came in before your talk. Many disparities and inequities have been magnified by the pandemic, specifically its impact among low-income folk and communities of color in the U.S. How have you seen leaders partner with communities and implement solutions to support communities who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Thank you so much.
I wish I could give like the hopeful, let me tell you these 3 things and now you're going to be hugely encouraged. This has been a terrible time personally for exactly those kinds of issues, the issues of inequality. I've felt kind of personally convicted at times, very I live in New York, as you know, I live in New York City. New York City was, for weeks and weeks, absolutely ground zero. And one of the things about New York City in those weeks, however, was it was a real tale of 2 cities. If you had work from home and you lived in a relatively tolerable, okay situation, it was okay, it was tolerable. If you were low wage or undocumented, oh man, it was a complete nightmare. And the whole thing was just unjust. It is unjust. And it makes me cringe a little bit. We're all now talking about heroes, and they are heroes. Those who work in our nursing homes, those who are doing this retail delivery, those who are driving buses, all these kinds of things. I saw a sign just when I was driving over here in one of the institutions in Spokane. It probably was a hospital saying, heroes work here. So all of this is true. But then I saw a speech from David Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of England at the end of World War I. And he said, he goes into this riff about how people in the humblest of circumstances are the heroes who won this war for us and sacrificed themselves and went through so much. And then his punchline was, now the job for the rest of us is to make this a country that's worthy of its heroes. And man, that really spoke to me, because we all know that a lot of the folks we're talking about as our heroes, and they don't have great prospects to catapult socioeconomically, even in the next generation. Often they don't live in a very good situation. They don't have access to the same education that some of us have means do. They don't have great health care themselves. They can't save adequately for retirement. So the person asked, what have I seen, that's addressed it? And man, of course, we've all seen things that give us hope and so on. And I could make 1 or 2 things up, or I could identify 1 or 2 things that have given me hope. But I guess what I more want to share is, it's mostly for me felt, what David Lloyd George said, in some big or small way, we all have the job of making this a society that's more fit for the people that we're now calling heroes, who aren't paid well enough, who don't have good enough health care, who don't have adequate education, and so on.
So let me build on that for a second. We had a wonderful talk last week, our Aram lecture on business ethics. Julie Fry, who's with the Gates Foundation, a wonderful alum of ours, and she talked about action, small action even, at the level of the individual.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, okay, good for you, yeah. And, yeah. I always say to folks in the context of business and organizations, often people get hung up and obsessed with what's going on at some level of the hierarchy, 4 or 5 levels away from them, incredibly remote. It discourages them, it bothers them, and, it's good to care about these things. And, what I would say to somebody, used to say to people in those circumstances, look, if you can talk to somebody or have some impact on that, that's great. But if you can't, you have to focus on what you can control. That's how mental health operates, that we control the controllables. And that's how good organizations thrive. And, I think you're totally right, Ken, or whoever, the Gates person was who said it, that, if all of us at least took on that kind of attitude, yes, the society is unjust, but if I can't change society on my own, what can I do now? And yeah, I think you and the person from Gates have given us a nice takeaway for a first step in response to making ours a society and country more fit for our heroes.
One from tonight. Would like to unpack some baggage talk here. You mentioned fear. Shouldn't a good leader understand how their own pressures are often a cause of team members' fear? Go back to that self-awareness thing you talked about.
Yeah. I'd like to, it seems like it's a very wise question, and this is one of the shames of this kind of environment, because my first thought would have been to say, could you say 2 or 3 more sentences about that, So let me tell you how I think I understand it and what I would say about it, So shouldn't a good leader understand how their own pressures, the pressures on me, the pressures I impose on myself as the team manager, whatever, are often a cause of team members' fear? Yes, absolutely. Self-awareness, that I am monitoring what's going on inside me. I think that theme comes back. But let me also take this in another kind of direction. I think sometimes we have this false, even destructive mentality as managers that part of my job is to protect the folks who work for me from these worries or concerns or fears. And so part of my job is to put on a kind of a false front, a patronizing kind of thing, like, it's going to be okay, or we have it under control, we got all this kind of stuff. And yes, as Napoleon said, at some level, leaders are dealers in hope. So people do need us to be the ones who give some hope. But, people are grown-ups and adults, and I've always, when it's clear that we're in a very difficult situation and where the future is unclear, and the person comes into the room and kind of pretends otherwise, then to me that breeds cynicism, anxiety, fear. What is he or she not telling me? What's really going on? And so I guess one of the directions I want to go with that question is, yes, you're right. It's incumbent on us to understand how the pressures I'm feeling are translating to my negative behaviors with the team. But then also I would say, I think in most circumstances, it can be helpful, build trust, sometimes build allegiance, loyalty, and so on, for me to make myself a little bit vulnerable and admit, look, I have to be very honest with you. Yes, I'm feeling under a lot of pressure right now, and yes, I'm not 100% sure when COVID ends, when our revenues come back, how long this is going to last, these kind of things. And then I think you see the team collectively exhale and say, okay, I'm not crazy. He's also worried. And then we can transition into, but here's what we're going to do about it the next 3 months and so on.
It's interesting, and again, going away from the questions for a second and building on what you said, you brought up David Lloyd George. I'll bring up one of his successors, Churchill. And I recall one of the things that Churchill used to say was, trust the English people, they can handle the truth. But then I fast forward 30-some years to Jimmy Carter and his famous talk from Camp David.
Yeah.
The malaise talk, I believe, that he gave, that a lot of people pointed to as, well, there's the president or the leader going too far. So with those two examples maybe set up as straw people, it's a balance, right? Can you talk about the balance between we are completely underwater versus sunny skies and parasols?
Yeah. Okay, I'll say a couple things, and that's a nice way you tee the whole thing up. First thing, I hadn't heard that question from Churchill, and I'm going to steal that and use it. Trust the English people; they can handle the truth. I believe that. That's what I would say. The Jimmy Carter speech, I guess we'd have to look at again. I mean, I wonder. I don't know actually how that all played out, but I'll run with the problem as you teed it up. And I think I would say two things. One, I would circle back to that little Napoleon quote. Leader is a dealer in hope. Not false hope, not fake hope, not ignore the truth hope. But I think part of your job, part of my job, part of a leader's job is, okay, here's our reality. And here's why we're going to make it. In a way that I believe and that in a way I can explain, so that I give the team something to grab onto. Here's the second thing I would say. Remember I talked about in the very beginning use this image, this riff of the Moses problem. We know we're going to the promised land, but we have no clue how we get through the next 3 years, And an idea I sometimes use with teams and managers and so on is, okay, look, the reality of the VUCA world is you're not going to be able to give the team a roadmap to the promised land. And they will accept that. People will accept that. But it's incumbent on you as a leader to be able to get us to the next village. And from the next village, we're going to see the obstacles that we couldn't see from here, and that'll help us to get to the village after that. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, people could handle the truth, but if we can give them no direction whatsoever, if we can't at least say, okay, and therefore to get ourselves going, here are the priorities for the next year. Here's what we got to do for the next 3 months. Here's what I need you to, I need to get us to the next village. Give us some concrete sense of how we're going to create some forward momentum for ourselves. And that momentum will help us to see and resolve obstacles as they become clearer to us on the way.
I'm thinking of a passage from a book that I read about, I think it was about working out. And the process the individual described was, if I can get a foot on the floor, I can get to the bathroom. If I can get to the bathroom, I can get my glasses on. If I get my glasses on, I can get to the kitchen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
I get to that next village.
Yeah. That's life.
Let's go
Sorry, could I tell?
No,
I tell
that's
another,
fine. No, it could go on a long way.
I tell another quick, and I'll try to collapse this anecdote real quickly. There's this story, it's probably apocryphal, but I've found it very instructive. There's this story about these soldiers, maybe World War I-ish era, go for a training hike somewhere maybe in the low Alps, Europe. And, a snow squall comes in, big problem, nobody was anticipating this, we're lost, we're in trouble. One of them finds he has a map in his pack. They look at the, hope comes. They look at the map, doesn't seem perfect, but, they get going and they somehow make their way down. When they get their way down, they realize it was a map of the Pyrenees, not the Alps at all. I'm sure it's an apocryphal story, but it's used to make a point about strategy, which I've found very relevant, frankly, that the most important thing about strategy, especially now in a volatile, in a VUCA-ish world where things change so quickly, the 5-year plan is not going to be relevant for 5 years, but the strategy, like that map, gets us going. And even though it couldn't really get us to where we needed to go, it got us started. And once we got to the first landmark, we then said, okay, now we need to go here, and this problem came up and we solved it. Yeah, and I think there's something to all that.
Cool. So another one from the audience. Chris, I love your books and read Heroic Leadership every summer. Can you speak to the use of an examen as a way to foster self-awareness?
Okay, so first let me thank the person. I hope you've read it so many times that you even had to buy another couple of copies. I mean, sincerely, I'm touched to see that. And remember, I spoke in the talk, for those who don't pick up on the question, I spoke in the talk about doing this little mental pit stop, taking a break every day, and the questioner is putting it in the traditional, original Jesuit Ignatian context. Ignatius uses the idea of examine, the Latin word like an exam, to examine yourself, to step out of it. And, I'll say one or two or three things. One, I made the point about these crazy worlds we're trying to live in now, social media feeds, text, so on, and we're just in the flow of life and out of what's the most important priority, what's going on inside me, and all these kinds of things. And I think something like this pit stop, like this examine, is weirdly more relevant now, way more relevant now than when Ignatius come up with the idea in the 16th century, which, I'm sorry, compared to today, a little sleepier, I mean, just not as much going on. So that's one thing I would say. Second thing I would say is I feel like, it's an idea of stopping for a couple of minutes every day. And, the first time I do it, it's not like I have great insight about my life. But I do it now, 1 day, 2 days, 10 days, 1 month, 3 months, and I'm starting to learn about myself. I'm starting to get some insight into some of my habitual strengths, weaknesses, temptations, problems, and I think that's the real juice. If I have any kind of there are a lot of people who do journaling every day, great, whatever works for you. And the thing with journaling, I don't think is that I sat down tonight, I journaled, and all the light bulbs went off. I think the thing about journaling was I made a practice of doing it. And after a month or so, and I started to look back, I came some insights. The last thing I want to say, though, is to be totally honest. People often presume that I do these things well because I write about them, and I feel like I must say, if I thought I was the exemplar of many of these things, I would have written a book about myself, I mean, I wrote a book about things that I needed to hear, and I don't do this way more often than I do it. I know it's the right thing to do, but, you get swept up into life and you forget it. I met a guy who, after a talk, some long time after a talk, ran into me and said, he set his alarm watch, we'd say now your smartphone watch, that it would go off at 12:15 or something every day to remind him, okay, now I have to take a minute away and think about things. And I heard it. I thought it was a great idea. And I said to myself, okay, you got to do that, but I haven't done it. So I guess I'm just confessing my own humanity, and having confessed all that, what the questioner pointed out is totally right. There's a great power in acquiring these kinds of habits and disciplines.
Okay. So let's stay with that theme for a second, because one thing we're talking a lot about with our community throughout the institution is the importance, the value, and maybe even the necessity of self-care. So other hints, thoughts, ideas along the lines of the examine as far as self-care?
Great that this is an alive topic in the Gonzaga community, I guess is what you're referring to, yeah? That's wonderful that you're saying it, because a lot of times it's just we need to get this done, and the idea of self-care doesn't come up. So wonderful that you're doing it. And I don't know, do I have any great wisdom to share? I'm not sure I have anything, that I have anything that adds any unique value to the question. I mean, I exercise more than I do my daily exam. I don't exercise a lot, but I do walk up and down the stairs every day. I mean, I think these kinds of things are important. I would say this: my wife will kill me for mentioning her in a thing, but you know, she worked right near Grand Central for an NGO, and now, of course, everything's virtual, huh? And she used to walk to the train station every morning, every evening. At lunch, would make a point of going out around that Midtown neighborhood and walking around. And those things were really valuable to her, and she got a lot out of those. Now we're at home. She's not doing that. I mean, she's far healthier than I am and far more pulled together than I am. But I can see that I think for a lot of us, this point of self-care is really relevant. You know, like some of these, you know, just that you took a walk as part of your commute every day, or that you took a walk after lunch, and now you're at home and you forget to do that, or you kind of get so sucked into work that you don't do that. Or for some people, you know, the drive home was a time to unwind. And I remember vividly, a buddy of mine once moved within walking distance of the office. And I said, oh man, that must be great. You know, he says, no, actually it's a big problem. He says, because I used to have like this 40-minute drive, and I used to unwind. It did a lot for me personally, and it was good for my family. He goes, now I'm coming home, I still have these work things going on. I'm not lashing out, you know, but I'm still working some of that out with my family. So I didn't give any great solutions, but I think the fact that you as a Gonzaga community are saying, okay, look, we need to put this on our radar, you've put your finger on something.
So switching from the daily or maybe the tactical to the more strategic. We had a question submitted talking about, you know, what strategic steps from the standpoint of leadership, I'll qualify it a little bit, would you say have worked best in your career and in your life over the long term? As you look back, you say, yeah, that's been a concept or a practice or a belief that's been fundamental to who I am as a leader across all these different situations that you've been in.
Okay, great question. So, I mean, and of course, you'd have to ask the people who were on teams with me, you know, I mean, not me. But let me, I mean, I'll try to give my own answer. Maybe a couple of things that I feel like I did do fairly well and that were good for me, and maybe things I would do differently, or, you know, weaknesses I recognize in myself. So, one thing I would say would be, you know, early in managerial life, I promoted somebody who was not like next in line, just because I thought she would be the best person. She had great potential, and you know, so she got the job. And man, she did a great job. And you know, for me, it was so cool, and it was so much fun. And one of the things that it made so clear in my mind is that, you know, we all have more talent than somehow we recognize or give ourselves credit for or give others credit for. And I kind of made a little bit of a habit of doing that, you know, it's not fair to overlook people who deserve a promotion. That's not my point. But, you know, where there was an opportunity to promote the deep select or the person who was maybe not quite ready but had the potential and so on, I kind of made a bit of a habit of doing that, and I felt like that was that's really powerful for people, you know, to signal that I believe in you and I know you can do this and I'm going to support you. That I thought was very powerful mechanism. So that's one thing I would say. Second thing I would say in terms of strategy, this in a more organizational level, is to screw something up really helps a lot in terms of your ability to strategically lead a group. And, you know, I didn't have my first screw up early enough in Morgan life, and that set me back, I would say, clearly. You know, I was too risk averse, guarded, defensive in some of the decisions I made. And then, you know, when you really screw something up and you realize, oh man, well, nobody died and we can fix it. It's a very freeing moment, and it makes you much freer, more open to take the kind of risk and do the kind of things that you need to do when you're leading a team or an organization. So how do I boil that into a piece of advice? Because I mean, I guess I don't want to advise screw something up as soon as possible. But, you know, the punchline is, how can you become the person who is willing to take enough risk and so on? On the other hand, I think I was probably good at communicating with teams. I got that. You know, you have to over-communicate. You know, you're in a group, you know, a little small group, and you put together the strategic plan or whatever it is, and then you give out this memo, and you have the meeting to announce it, and you expect everybody is going to be so excited and get on board, and instead they don't get the whole thing, and you get pissed off at them. You know, well, geez, we were working on this for 6 months, and we went through all our doubts. We had all the information. Why in the world would we expect them to get it on the first bounce? That part, I think I understood. So I was good at over-communicating and sharing, but I feel like I was probably a little defensive as a leader of teams and groups. You know, when people told me the truth, especially in a group setting, I mean, I wasn't a nasty person, I hope. But, you know, as I look back, I kind of, you know, replay moments in my life of kind of getting too uptight, you know, right. Where in those moments where, geez, if I had only had the presence to say, wow, you know, that's a really interesting thing. I hadn't thought of that, and let's see where that goes. That would have made me a better leader. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, what a appropriate note to end on, the Jesuit power of reflection. Chris, I want to thank you for coming out here and spending time with us tonight and on campus during the day, or at least virtually on campus with some of our students. We really enjoyed it. I also want to take a moment to thank our friends here at AMPT, Lighting and Audio Visual, a great production facility. They've been wonderful in setting it up and helping us navigate this kind of new virtual world, so thank you to all of them. Thank you, of course, to the Canfield family for their support and their vision and their commitment to this lifelong learning series. This will be the one of many that we will see in the future. And lastly, thanks to all of you for taking the time out of a busy and we know stressful evening to be with us here in Spokane with the School of Business. And we wish you nothing but good wishes, and please be safe. So good night, everybody.